Boy, did this episode ever prove me wrong. Now, this episode of The Flash, I was originally I wouldn't say dreading it, but I was not looking forward to it all that much because based on the promos, it seemed like they were going for the old "I'm losing my powers" cliche, which has become a cliche in the realm of comic book stories because they've even done it in some of the movies. For instance, Superman 2, he gave up his powers. Spider-Man 2, he gave up his powers. And seeing that they were going that route with the Flash, on one hand, I'm glad that they were getting it out of the way early, but on the other hand, I was wondering, why do we even have to resort to that tired old storyline? So that really summed up my mindset going in. But for the most part, I really like this episode. There were issues. It is not a perfect episode, but I'll get to that in a second. The plot this time around is Barry goes after this new metahuman, Blackout, who over the course of the episode goes after Dr. Wells, but when he strikes Barry with his lightning attack, he actually siphons Barry's electricity. He feeds off of Barry's energy and Barry loses his speed. He becomes a regular person, which very much distresses him because he loved being the Flash. He loved being able to help people. He loved running at super speed. He loved almost everything about it. So when Blackout actually comes to Star Labs in search of Dr. Wells, it poses an interesting, almost die-hard scenario. And in addition, there is a hostage crisis over at Central City Police Station. The Clock King, on loan from Arrow, I assume, manages to get free and take basically the entire police station hostage, including Joe and Iris, and eventually Eddie, because Eddie completely fails at stopping Tuckman. But then again, I don't really know what he could have done against a bulletproof vest, aside from maybe shoot the guy in the leg. I don't know. So, yeah, this was a very good episode, but although one of the major problems, I think, is that the two plots, the hostage crisis over at Central City Police Station and the Die Hard scenario at Star Labs, were a little too disconnected. They were a little too distanced from each other. And I think with some modifications to the script, it would have found a pretty good way to tie these two plots together a little more. But for the most part, each of them were handled very well. The sense of powerlessness that Barry was feeling over losing his powers and how he was lamenting that it was like he lost a part of himself and and all that, I thought was really well done and really well acted. And really coming to terms with the possibility that the lightning bolt chose him, and confiding in his fellow men and women over at or woman over at Star Labs, confiding these thoughts to them, not only provided some interesting character dynamics, but also, again, some interesting acting opportunities, or opportunities for good acting by one Grant Gustin, Danielle Panabaker, Carlos Valdez, and Tom Cavanaugh. Tom Cavanaugh, Dr. Wells, is still the most interesting character on this show. Not that the other characters are bad. I still really like the other characters, but again, Dr. Wells, what I really like about him is that he is very much about masks, but you never know. It is very much a constant chess game with him. You never know just how much he's revealing at one time. You never know if he's completely telling the truth. He has not even remotely gotten to play his full hand yet. I don't even think he's had to draw any new cards. So there's that. And in addition, we had a couple of really cool villains. Blackout found a really nice blend of sympathetic and menacing. He was menacing, but at the same time, you could definitely tell where he came from in terms of his motivation and wanting to kill Dr. Wells. And in addition, we have Robert Nepper as the Clock King. And again, you can kind of see where he is coming from. He is very much bitter over the fact that he never actually got to say goodbye to his terminally ill sister, I think it was. Anyway, I don't know, some family member, and seeing as he is, and this was actually a pretty nice way to tie it in with his shtick of time and clocks. But he said, "Time is precious, and I will not spend another moment of my time in prison." So, again, a couple of really good villains here, which is rare for this show thus far, because the villains, for the most part, have been pretty lackluster up to this point. I think the only exception so far has been Captain Cold. But Blackout and the Clock King, which I don't know if we can count the Clock King as a Flash villain because he showed up on Arrow Season 2, but I digress. Really good villains, really elevated this episode. And both plotlines were handled very well. There was a definite sense of suspense. There was some interesting conflict posed, not just physical conflict against the villains, but also the conflict of Barry really feeling powerless. However, again, there were some issues. Namely, when Dr. Wells releases Girder, the very boring Biff Tannen character from the last episode, he releases Girder, and Girder goes up against Blackout and basically distracts him and gets killed in the process. And Barry basically goes through this outburst towards Dr. Wells. He says, "We're all just pawns to you. Which of us are you going to sacrifice next?" Which I actually thought was pretty rushed. I thought that outburst was something that came way too early in the series. That honestly seems like something that would come later on, maybe after Barry has potentially lost some of the trust in Dr. Wells, or maybe once Dr. Wells has revealed more of his true colors. But immediately jumping to that outburst, when, in all honesty, a lot of people would have probably done the same thing, was really uncalled for, I thought. And if that little conflict of Barry really not trusting Dr. Wells, if that little conflict had not been here, then I think this episode would have been better off, and it would have had more time to develop Barry's sense of powerlessness. And this actually ties in to how they could have better connected the plots, because if Barry had focused more not only on stopping Blackout and saving his new friends, but also getting to Central City Police Station and stopping the Clock King, and how he's really not able to do that, I think would have not only made this episode more powerful in that it focused on one arc with Barry, but also it would have tied these two plots together more. If we had actually gotten some more development in Barry's really coming to terms with the fact that he cannot help people like he could when he had super speed, again, would have made for a stronger episode. But as such, the suspense was still there. I liked some of the issues that they raised. The two plots themselves were relatively well told. Although I did like the one with Blackout more. The Clock King, Robert Knepper, basically outacted at everyone else in the room. I liked his very pronounced way of speaking. So there was that. And yeah, very good episode of The Flash. Did have some minor issues, but in the end, those minor issues are not what stood out. What stood out were the performances, the action, the sense of powerlessness that came with losing his superpowers. So they didn't entirely waste that concept. And some really nice character interactions, specifically with Barry and the people over at Star Labs. Iris and her dad and Iris and the Clock King could have been handled better, but because Iris has shown herself to be not exactly the brightest bulb in the box up to this point. But again, I'm not going to go into that, because then I will inevitably raise the whole Laurel issue, and we don't want that.